Welcome to the Baboom Baboom podcast, your go-to source for expert tips on car stereo installation, vehicle wiring, and all things wiring related. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, we've got the advice to help you power up your ride. Get ready to crank up the volume on your knowledge and make your next wiring project a success.
Okay, imagine this. It's a perfect summer evening. You've got friends, food, the grill's going, and you're ready to crank up the music. But then, disaster. The sound is weak, tuney, barely making it across the yard. Total party foul, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, people often spend a ton of money on those fancy outdoor speakers, but then completely forget about the wiring.
It's like buying a sports car and then putting the cheapest tires you can find on it. It's just not going to perform. And that's why I'm so glad we're diving into this guide from Baboom Baboom today. They're all about practical audio advice, and they really emphasize how crucial good wiring is, especially for outdoor setups. So first up, wire gauge. What's the deal with that?
Okay, so wire gauge is basically just the thickness of the wire, and I think a lot of people assume thicker wire just means more expensive, which, yeah, it can be. But the real key is how well that thicker wire carries the audio signal, especially over longer distances.
Right, because if the signal has to travel a long way, like across a big backyard, it's going to lose some of its strength along the way if it hits too much resistance.
Exactly. Imagine driving on a wide-open highway versus being stuck in traffic on a tiny congested road. Thinner wire is like that congested road, higher resistance, more signal loss, especially over longer distances. And what does that mean for your audio? Weaker sound, maybe some distortion, a disappointing listening experience?
Nobody wants their audio stuck in traffic.
Right.
So what gauges does the Baboom Baboom guide recommend?
They break it down based on how far your speakers are from your amplifier, which makes sense. For a typical backyard up to 50 feet, they recommend 14 gauge wire. But if you're pushing out a bit further, say 50 to 100 feet, you'll want to step up to 12 gauge for a stronger signal. And for those really big outdoor spaces, anything beyond 100 feet, you'll want to go with 10 gauge wire to really deliver that full sound.
So bigger distance, thicker wire, makes sense. But it's not just about distance outdoors, right? We've got sun, rain, maybe even a curious squirrel or two to contend with.
Oh, absolutely. That's why choosing outdoor rated wire is so crucial. It's got to be tough enough to handle the elements.
Okay, so what exactly makes wire outdoor rated?
Well, it starts with the outer jacket. You want a material that's UV resistant, kind of like sunscreen for your wires. You know how a garden hose left out in the sun gets brittle and cracked? You don't want that happening to your speaker wire.
Definitely not. And then, of course, there's moisture.
Right. Even if you're not in a rainforest, you've got morning dew, sprinklers, the occasional downpour. Outdoor rated wire has waterproof insulation to keep all that moisture from seeping in and corroding the copper.
It's like choosing between a light jacket and a heavy-duty parka. You want the right protection for the environment. Now, another material choice the Baboom Baboom guide mentions is copper wire versus copper-clad aluminum, or CCA. Is that where we get into the whole budget versus best debate?
Yeah, it can be. Look, pure copper is the gold standard for a reason. It's an excellent conductor. It's durable, reliable, but it does come with a higher price tag. That's true.
So where does CCA fit into this?
So CCA has an aluminum core with a thin layer of copper. It's a way to make the wire lighter and more affordable, especially if we're running it over longer distances. And honestly, for shorter runs, especially if you're mostly listening to music with higher frequencies like vocals or cymbal crashes, you might not even notice a difference in sound quality.
So for someone setting up a smaller outdoor area, maybe on a budget, CCA could be a good option.
It definitely could be. But if you're a real audiophile or you have a larger space to cover, investing in pure copper is the way to go for the best possible sound in the long run.
It's all about knowing your priorities and what matters most for your setup. Now, before we move on to installation, Baboom Baboom talks about something else that's super important outdoors.
Shielding.
Oh yeah, shielding is key, especially outside.
So we got the wire itself, but what are we shielding it from?
Think about all the invisible stuff that can interfere with your sound. Power lines, electrical equipment, even appliances from your house or your neighbors. They all emit electromagnetic and radio frequency interference. It's like trying to have a conversation next to a buzzing neon sign. All that extra noise gets in the way.
Exactly. Shielding is like putting a protective barrier around your audio signal. Shielded wire has a layer of conductive material, often a foil or a braided shield, that surrounds the inner conductors and that blocks or redirects all that unwanted interference.
Need top-quality electrical wire? Baboom's got you covered. Get your 6-pack today. Each combo comes in 6 different colors and a total of 600 feet of wire. Perfect for any project, and you won't find a better price in the industry. Head over to baboom.com now to snag yours. That's baboom.com.
So it's like we're giving our audio signal its own little suit of armor to protect it as it travels to the speakers.
That's a great way to put it. And it's especially important outdoors where there are so many more sources of interference compared to inside your house. Think about it, power lines running to your house, maybe along your property line. If your speaker wire is running right next to those power lines for any significant distance, you're going to get a lot of interference.
So how do we avoid that?
Distance and angles are your friends in this case. The Baboom guide recommends at least 3 feet of distance between your speaker wire and any power lines if you can manage it. And if you absolutely have to cross them, try to do it at a 90-degree angle. That way there is minimal exposure.
Short and sweet. Got it.
Yeah.
Avoid those long parallel runs near the power lines check. So we've got the right kind of wire. It's shielded. We're keeping it away from those power lines. What's next?
Now it's time to think about installation. Even with the best quality shielded wire, if your connections are left exposed, you're setting yourself up for problems.
Because it's not just the wire itself, right? It's the points where you connect it to the speakers or the amplifier that can be vulnerable to the elements as well.
Exactly. Water and moisture can get in there and corrode the connections and cause all sorts of issues. That's why the Baboom guide really stresses using weatherproof connectors or junction boxes for making those connections.
Weatherproof connectors, junction boxes, what's the difference?
Weatherproof connectors are great for individual connections. They create a really tight seal around the wires that keeps moisture and dirt and things out.
And junction boxes?
Junction boxes are more like little hubs for multiple connections. So if you've got a more complex setup, maybe with several speakers, a junction box can keep everything organized and protected.
Got it. It's like giving those connections their own little fortress to keep them safe from the elements. And the guide also mentions using conduit to protect the wire, even though it's already outdoor rated. Is that really necessary?
It's not always strictly necessary, but it's definitely a good idea. It's kind of like your outdoor rated wire is like a good rain jacket, but conduit is like having an umbrella too. Why not have both levels of protection?
So if there's a chance someone might step on the wire or something might fall on it, conduit gives it that extra layer of protection.
Exactly. Plus, it can help keep things organized, which is always a plus.
Organized and protected. I like it. So let's say we've got the right wire, it's shielded, the connections are protected, and we've even used conduit. What's the final step before we fire up the tunes?
Testing. Never skip the testing phase.
Testing. 1, 2. It seems obvious, but I'm guessing a lot of people are just too excited to get their new setup going and they skip right over this part.
It's tempting, but trust me, it's worth taking the time to test everything thoroughly before you bury that wire underground or mount those speakers permanently.
Okay, so walk me through. What are we listening for during our audio test drive?
The first thing is just to make sure all the speakers are working. Do you hear sound coming out of each one? Then check the volume balance. Are some speakers noticeably louder or quieter than others? That could indicate a wiring problem. And finally, listen closely for any signs of interference, any buzzing, humming, or static. Those are all signs that something's not right.
Because if you do hear those things, it's way easier to fix it now than it is after the wire's buried or the speaker's 20 feet up on the wall.
Exactly. Catching those problems early on can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
For sure. And speaking of getting the most out of your outdoor audio, the Baboom guide doesn't just stop at the wiring basics. They also delve into speaker placement, which is something I think a lot of people don't give enough thought to. But it can make a huge difference in terms of how your audio actually sounds.
Absolutely. We'll jump into that right after this.
Okay, so let's talk speaker placement. I know this is about more than just like spacing them out evenly around the yard, right?
Got it. Speaker placement, it's like one of those things that can make or break your outdoor audio experience. People get so focused on choosing the right speakers, getting the wiring perfect, which is all important, don't get me wrong, but then they just kind of slap those speakers up wherever and hope for the best.
And I get it. Yards can be tricky. You've got trees, patios, the house, maybe a rogue gnome or two.
Right. But even with like the most pristine wiring setup, bad speaker placement can leave you with sound that's, I don't know, just kind of off.
Yeah, like one corner of the yard is getting blasted with sound while the other side is stuck with this weak, muffled mess. Not exactly a recipe for a great party atmosphere.
Exactly. It's like, imagine if you only had one light bulb to illuminate your entire house. You'd probably put it in a central location, right? But that doesn't mean everything's going to be lit perfectly.
Yeah.
You'd have some areas that are way too bright, others that are super dim, and probably a few weird shadows in the corners.
So we need to think about audio, like we think about lighting. It's about creating a balanced soundscape throughout the whole space.
Exactly. And the Baboom Baboom guide does a great job of breaking down how to do that. First off, they say to really consider the acoustics of your yard.
Because unlike inside the house, where you've got walls and a ceiling to contain the sound, outdoors, it's a free-for-all.
Pretty much. You've got trees, bushes, fences, even the side of your house, all affecting how those sound waves are going to travel and bounce around.
So every yard has its own unique sound signature.
Absolutely. And the guide recommends taking a walk around your yard, really paying attention to where the sound seems to get, muffled or where there are a lot of echoes.
So it's about identifying those potential problem areas before you even start placing speakers. Then what?
Then it's time to start thinking about where people are actually going to be hanging out in your yard. Is it mostly on the patio, by the pool, or are people going to be spread out more? You want to create that balanced sound experience where everyone can enjoy the music without any one spot being blasted or totally left out.
Right, because if the main party zone is on the patio, but I've got a walkway leading up to it, I don't want someone walking towards the party getting their eardrums blasted before they even reach the fun.
Exactly. And don't forget about elevation. Raising your speakers even a little bit can make a huge difference, especially if you've got a lot of shrubs or low furniture around.
So, mounting them on a fence or using speaker stands is a good idea.
It can be. Just remember to be mindful about the angle.
Because if they're aimed too high, you're just blasting sound up into the sky for the birds to enjoy.
Right, and too low and it gets absorbed by the ground or the backs of people's chairs.
It's a delicate balancing act. Any other pro tips for finding that sonic sweet spot?
The Baboom Baboom guide emphasizes that every yard is different, so don't be afraid to experiment a little.
Put a speaker in a weird spot and see what happens.
Yeah, tuck one among some plants, try putting one under an eave. You never know what's going to sound amazing.
Because sometimes the best solutions are the ones you discover by just trying something new.
Exactly. And that's what makes setting up outdoor audio so rewarding. It's all about figuring out what sounds best to you in your unique space.
So there you have it. Another awesome deep dive, but this time into the world of outdoor audio. With a little help from the Baboom Baboom guide. We covered a ton today, choosing the right wire, shielding it from interference, those crucial installation tips, and of course, the art of speaker placement. Armed with this knowledge, you're well on your way to creating an outdoor sound system that's worthy of any party, gathering, or just a relaxing evening under the stars.
And the best part is, none of this is rocket science. With a little planning, some basic know-how, and a willingness to experiment, anyone can achieve amazing outdoor audio.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, happy listening, everyone.
Need top-quality electrical wire? Baboom Baboom's got you covered. Get your 6-pack today. Each combo comes in 6 different colors and a total of 600 feet of wire. Perfect for any project, and you won't find a better price in the industry. Head over to baboombaboom.com now to snag yours. That's baboombaboom.com.